Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar today. Now, as you're getting comfortable, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. And so today we have a really great webinar planned. My name is Stacia Dreyer, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. I'm the research director here at the Clean Energy Transition Institute, or CETI, and I'm so very excited to kick off this webinar series with Dr. Reuven Sussman and Dr. Beth Karlin. And thanks so much, Beth and Reuven, for joining us today to share your expertise. So this is the first webinar in a series called Buildings Don't Decarbonize Themselves, People Do. And today we're going to be providing a broad overview, answering the question, what do the behavioral and social sciences have to do with building decarbonization? Now, before we dive into the session, a few notes on participating in this webinar. We're recording the event, and the recording, as well as the slide deck, will be shared with you in a follow-up email by the end of next week. We'll be posting links and resources in the chat throughout the webinar, which you can navigate to in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. And please use the chat for any thoughts and comments, as well as to connect with each other. And again, for those of you just joining, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. And it's great to see folks already doing that. We also will have a dedicated Q&A session at the end, and you can use the Q&A function to ask questions as they arise throughout the presentation. And you can also find that at the toolbar in the bottom of the Zoom screen. And we'll try to answer some of the questions as they arise, so no need to wait until the very end of the session to ask your questions. Closed captioning can also be turned on for this event by clicking the Show Captions feature and then View Full Transcript button, again, at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. Now, if you can't see those things, you might have to click on 3 buttons on the bottom right that say More, and that should be in the bottom right-hand corner. And finally, we have Jamie here on the call, who is our Communication and Operations Director. If you're having any technical difficulties whatsoever, please just email her at jamie@cleanenergytransition.org. So here's our agenda for today. I want to talk a little bit about my organization, the Clean Energy Transition Institute, and the decarbonization forums that we organize. Then I'll introduce the session and the panelists. Following, we'll dive into each of the presentations and wrap up with a Q&A. So the Clean Energy Transition Institute, or CETI, is an independent, nonpartisan research and analysis nonprofit. We use a systemic, economy-wide lens to advance technical, economic, and equitable decarbonization solutions tailored to the unique policy, energy, and economic context of the Northwest states. So that's work in Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. Our mission is to accelerate decarbonization and achieve an equitable clean energy transition in the Northwest at the speed and scale climate science requires. And if you aren't familiar with our work, I invite you to take a look at our website after this webinar. This webinar series is part of our Decarbonization Forum offerings. We run these forums to illuminate, demystify, and debate trade-offs of the most important and complex aspects of decarbonization in the Northwest. Some of the forums have been online, while others have been in person. And we have a few of our past forums listed here on this slide. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, this series is called Buildings Don't Decarbonize Themselves, People Do. And I've been brainstorming this idea for quite some time, and it was spurred by conversations and meetings I've been in where the human element seemed to be missing when folks were talking about building decarbonization. I wanted to create a space that provides real, on-the-ground examples of how social and behavioral insights can be used to address the complexities of building decarbonization. And thus, this series was born. We currently have 2 webinars planned, this one today, and then one next month all about heat pumps and humans, specifically contractors and customers. And we're still planning the 3rd one. So that brings me to our session today. Human Insights 101. What do the behavioral and social sciences have to do with building decarbonization? Building decarbonization grew out of the need to address climate change by reducing emissions. Climate change is, in fact, a problem of human behavior. Attempting to address climate change, and more specifically, building decarbonization without thinking about the human element, severely impacts our ability to make progress. And that's why the social and behavioral sciences are essential to achieving building decarbonization goals. That's because they focus on humans, society, and culture. Social and behavioral scientists work in the energy and climate spaces as civil servants, practitioners, academics, and consultants. However, in most cases, the building sector has been slow to bring these scientists on board to help achieve building decarbonization, missing an opportunity to take advantage of these key contributors and their expertise. So today, we have two amazing applied social and behavioral scientists here to talk about just that. I'll introduce both Dr. Beth Karlin and Dr. Reuven Sussman now, and then Reuven is going to kick us off with his presentation. So Reuven is the director of the Behavioral Health and Human Dimensions Program at the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, also known as ACEEE. He directs research on energy efficiency behavior and climate change energy efficiency behavior change and health programs. He directs Bear Hub, which is the Behavior, Energy, Action, and Research Hub, as well as co-chairs the Behavior, Energy, and Climate Change Conference, known as BEC. And he has authored academic papers and book chapters on the psychology of climate change, behavioral interventions to encourage energy efficiency, and the psychological determinants of pro-environmental behaviors. Reuven holds a Doctor of Science in Social and Environmental Psychology from the University of Victoria. And his talk will set the stage for this webinar series by providing a broad view of behavioral science theories and how they're relevant for building decarbonization. And thanks, Reuven, for joining us today. And Dr. Beth Karlin is the founder and CEO of the Sea Change Institute, which is a research and strategy firm that studies and shapes the role of human behavior in advancing energy and climate solutions. She is passionate about leveraging behavioral science to accelerate the just transition to a low carbon future, and has spent the last 15 years applying research to support an equitable electrification, community energy, and climate resilience. Beth serves on the journal editorial boards of Energy Efficiency and Frontiers in Social Psychology. She co-organizes the BEC conference alongside with Reuven, and she teaches in the Sustainability and Behavior Change program at UC San Diego. She earned her PhD in social ecology from UC Irvine. And her presentation today will focus on residential electrification decision-making and how behavioral science can enhance electrification efforts across the customer journey. And thank you, Beth, for being here today. Okay, and so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Reuven. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm going to pull up my presentation here in just a moment. See if I can, here we go. I am thrilled to be here, and I get to talk about my favorite thing, which is behavioral science, why it matters, and how it can matter to building decarbonization. Thanks for the intro. It saves me some time. I don't need to talk about myself at all. I'm just going to dive right into it. To illustrate sort of how behavioral scientists bring a different lens to these challenges, I'm first going to talk about a study that was done, I guess, many years ago now, but back in 1981. And participants in the study came to the lab, and they were asked to rank order, or maybe it was rate, a number of home appliances. I took some random pictures off the internet to give you a sense of what they were talking about. And I said, order these in terms of which uses most energy to least energy. Now, on average, people came up with this ordering. But in reality, the energy consumption of these was more like this, almost the exact opposite of what people thought. And what you can see here is there's a bias towards thinking the bigger and louder things use more electricity. And that serves you right in many cases, but not all. So what I'm trying to say is even if you want to save energy in your home, you're an average homeowner or household resident, you may not be able to. And that's the kind of understanding that behavioral scientists can bring to a challenge like this. So my plan for today is explain why behavior matters, briefly talk about some theories, and then very briefly talk about the EAST framework, which I particularly like. So let's start with behavior and why it matters. I just want to bring light to one report. It's now a few years old, but back a few years ago, the International Energy Agency published this report on how to get the world to net zero by 2050. And spoiler alert, over 60% of it has to do with voluntary energy reduction. And most people, when they think of voluntary energy reduction, they think of turning off the lights. And reducing excess energy is one thing. Turning off the lights is a very small action, but the real energy savings comes from more than just that. So yes, there's three items. More excessive or wasteful energy use reduction is one part of it. But then transportation mode switching is a big part, and another one is materials efficiency gains, getting people and industries to voluntarily switch over to more green concrete and steel, for example. Now, a point I'm trying to make here is that voluntary behavior is really important. The kind of behavior that matters, efficiency actions, things like upgrading and installing energy efficient items in your home, doing insulation, that kind of thing, is more effective than curtailment behaviors like turning off the lights. Both are important, but efficiency behavior is generally more impactful. And these important behaviors do require programs and policies. They don't just enact themselves. It's very difficult to change. It's tempting to think, oh, we'll just change people's behaviors instead of throwing rebate money at them or whatnot. That's not easy to do, and behavioral scientists can help pave the way, but you'll never get 100% of people changing 100% of their behavior. Programs and policies can really help shift the needle. So what influences behavior? I'm going to start with the assumptions that I get on what drives behavior, and then I'm going to talk about theories. So since being outside of the psychology space, the behavioral science academic space, I've run into people that actually put programs on the ground. And what drives these programs are a few common assumptions. First, people don't know. If we simply educated people, gave them information about what's better, what's more energy efficient, they would do it. We know that doesn't always happen. Money is everything. If people could save money by changing to a heat pump or getting an induction cooktop, for example, they would do it. Well, that's not always the case, especially with induction cooktops, which, because people have like an irrational love for gas stoves. So money is an important driver, but not always. Technology will save us. We don't even need to get people to change their behavior. We'll just get them to install, sensor lights and that kind of thing. Well, the truth is people need to install them and use them properly. So the human element can't be removed entirely. Policies and laws are all we need to change behavior. Yes, policies and laws are very important levers, perhaps the most powerful levers. But how many people here have driven above the speed limit, for example? How many people recycle when there's no law about it? They just think it's the right thing to do. So people act for more than just those reasons. People make rational decisions. Yes, people often make rational decisions, but people don't always choose, the thing that is most cost effective. For example, why would somebody buy a very expensive automobile when a cheap one can do the exact thing they need it, which is get it from point A to point B in at the speed limit? People make emotional decisions as well. So here's some theories you can use to change behavior. I removed one of them, but I'm going to get right into the EAST framework created by the Behavioral Insights team. This crams together decades of social psychology research in a nice package that I think is pretty effective. So if you want somebody to change their behavior within a building, upgrade their building, or unplug unused appliances or hang drying the laundry, whatever the behavior, think of EAST. Think of making that behavior easier, more attractive, more social, and your intervention should be timely in some way, so time-related factor. So easy meaning, you can create a default, so the behavior you want is the default one, and they have to choose an alternative if they want to do something else. Reduce friction, so simply making your forms easier to read, and less clicks in your mouse, for example. Simplify your message, making it more attractive. So making the option you want get more attention. Design rewards and punishments for maximum effect. So for example, if you have a credit you want to give or an incentive, don't give it as a rebate that the customer needs to send in for later. Make it reduce the sticker price. Same rebate, better effect. Make it social. So show that other people are doing it. Bake into your intervention some sort of strategy that lets other people see what everyone's doing. Use social networks. So capitalize on champions within a network or within a neighborhood that can tell other people. Solicit a public commitment. If you get somebody to say they're going to do something publicly, they know their commitment is public, it's going to be more effective than if it's private or if they don't have to make that commitment. And then timely, prompt people exactly when they're receptive. Like if you want to get them to turn off the light, don't put the sign across the room or outside the room, put it right next to the light switch. Consider immediate costs and benefits. This has to do with the design of rewards and punishments I mentioned earlier. And help plan responses better. So maybe helping people develop a plan that they can put into action will help them follow through with that plan later. These are the elements of one framework. There's lots of great frameworks out there. I just happen to use this one from the Behavioral Insights team, but there's others I can talk about also. And I'm just going to talk about one way that we tried to make one behavior more attractive. And the way we did that in this particular study that we did with ACEEE a couple of years ago was using what's called the discrete choice experiment. So we wanted to see how can we make home energy upgrade packages as attractive as possible. We want not just one-off upgrades, but we want to encourage homeowners to do a package of upgrades, a comprehensive package that together is bigger than the sum of its parts. So we wanted to learn, what do people find attractive in a package? What would a good package be? And to do that, we solicited a nationally representative sample of US homeowners, and we asked them to choose between two packages 6 times. So this is an example. Package A had these items in it. Package B had these items in it. And you get these savings from them. We simply asked, if you had to choose between these two, which one would you prefer? And after we asked people to do 6 choices like this, we could use the magic of statistics to figure out which single item or items people liked the most, and what groups of items might make most attractive to most people. And I'll give you one little piece of this report. You can read more of it on our website. But we found that there was 5 classes of preferences, 5 groups of items people liked. And so we applied names to these these aren't names based on any kind of characteristics of the homeowners. It's really just based on the preferences that were clustered together. But 28% of our sample that was willing to invest at least $1,000 were appliance enthusiasts. They only wanted to, they preferred to upgrade their appliances. They really didn't want solar. There's also the mechanical systems enthusiasts, a little bit more than a quarter of the sample, interested in their mechanical systems like HVAC and hot water heating. Mechanical systems purists really just wanted the mechanical systems, HVAC and hot water heater. They really didn't want solar, EV charging, windows. And then there's max energy savers, traditional energy savers. They wanted traditional comprehensive energy efficiency, so really focusing on the envelope improvements, HVAC, et cetera. And then the energy independent seekers, I mean, again, this is not a judgment based on characteristics or survey. It's just they liked solar, EV chargers, energy efficiency. This kind of thing would allow for them to get off the grid if they wanted to. I mean, in an ideal world. But my point here is not what are these packages, but that there are packages. And this is one kind of way that you might be able to make the behavior of home energy upgrading, comprehensive upgrades, more attractive. So I'm going to give you my key takeaways now. To sum up, I start with a dad joke. It's okay because I am a dad. He specializes in drawing conclusions. I can hear the collective groans even though I don't have my speakers on. Behavior matters. theories can be useful, and I touched on just the East framework, but there's others that can be very useful as well. And if you want to get people to act, a nice rule of thumb is make the behavior easier, more attractive, more social, and more timely. I also want to end by just mentioning Bear Hub. Both myself and Beth Karlin, the other speaker for today, are involved in Bear Hub. It's a service that ACEEE provides where we increase participation in any behavior related program or any energy related program rather, whether it's in industry, buildings, or transportation. We do it at no cost. And we just finished our first round. And so you can keep your eyes peeled for a webinar on that from us. And we're hoping to be able to offer another round in the future. So if you go to bearhub.net, you can learn more about that. That's it. Thank you so much for having me, Stacia. And I look forward to answering questions and hearing what Beth has to say.
Great. Thanks so much, Reuven. Much appreciated. And so now we're going to transition to Beth's presentation, hand over screen sharing to Beth. But yeah, and again, thanks all for the folks joining the webinar today. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the webinar chat. All right. Handing it over to you, Beth.
All right. Oh, this is my least favorite part where I have to do the technology part. Okay. Are we ready for me to try and do this?
We're ready and we have time.
Okay. How's that look?
Great. Perfect.
Fantastic. All right. Hello, everyone. My name's Beth Karlin. I've known Stacia and Reuven for 15, 20 something years since grad school. So it's very fun. I think this is the first time the three of us have done a session together, even though we've been kind of circling each other at psychology and climate change and energy conferences for a long time. So this is very fun for me. So I'm going to talk specifically about a study or a project we did that kind of compiled data from a few different places, exploring barriers and opportunities along the electrification journey. There is a kind of public compilation of some of this research on this QR code. We also have a book chapter that's based on this coming out soon in a really great book on the social science of energy technology, edited by Kim Wolski, that I think is going to be out later this year. But that's my focus. Another potential title for this talk that I realized in the past few minutes, clicking, I need to make the clicking work. There we go, is pretty much what Reuven said, and then a few things that he didn't, because really the behavioral science of energy use and of climate behavior focuses on a lot of different interpretations of a few key theories and concepts, which I think Reuven did a great job of tapping into, and I'll probably address in slightly different ways. As Stacia said, I'm with Sea Change. We're a small applied behavioral science firm that works primarily, but not exclusively, in climate change and energy behavior. We were talking before this session, my dissertation was actually on residential energy feedback. So I got bit with the energy bug in 2009, March 2009, when OPower launched Google Power Meter, for anyone who remembers that. And I've just been fascinated by how people make energy decisions ever since then. Even though the technology keeps changing, what it means to be a person that just wants hot pizza and cold beer, or neither of those if you're gluten intolerant, hasn't changed as much. So it's a really fun thing to keep kind of learning and relearning this work. So for this project and for this talk, I'm going to talk through two key things. One, what are the pain points, motivations, and barriers specifically for home electrification technologies? And then two, how can behavioral science specifically enhance electrification efforts across the customer journey? And this work is based on a couple key pieces of work that we did. One was funded by Calpine in partnership with Peninsula Clean Energy at the time, now called Westlight Energy. And they funded us to look at their own electrification programs and their own customer research, as well as all publicly available literature. So we were so fortunate that they let us look at all these different studies, like some of the ones that Reuven cited and many others. So we searched academic databases, industry sites, looking at all of these different topics. And then we kind of identified from the literature. We also have been worked with Uplight from 2019 to 2025 on a series of customer research studies, including an annual 1,000 customer North American research pulse study, and these deep dives on things like EVs, rates, distributed energy resource owners, so that we got a really broad and deep understanding of what was going on with people when they thought about energy and specifically electrification. So based on those, we kind of compiled this summary that you're seeing today. So I'll start with a key point. Why a psychological approach? I think Stacia said, for many of you on the call, you don't come necessarily from a psychological or behavioral science background. And this is why, is that, and Reuven, I think, talked about this, is that our programs, when he talked about assumptions, programs are really designed for our frontal lobe, conscious, effortful, thinking, weighing pros and cons. But our brain often defaults to the limbic system, fast, automatic, frequent, emotional, that kind of fight or flight gut system. Another way to think about this, because these are big words and nobody likes those, is that programs are designed for the inner Spock in all of us, right? Spock is rational and calculating. And for those of you who don't follow Star Trek, I'm going to keep talking about it for another couple minutes. And he thinks through. He always makes the right decision, the rational decision, versus Captain Kirk, who's rash and brash and goes down into the planet before he knows if there's danger there. And that sounds cool, and we all want to be a hero. But this person on the right, our limbic system, also sometimes looks, when we're not careful, like Homer Simpson, just like wanting donuts and getting hit on the head by anvils. So when you think about our programs, so much of what we do, our focus, as Reuven said, on information and motivation. If only they knew and only they cared. These approaches work excellently for Spock, and we all have a little Spock inside of us, but our inner Homer ignores all of this and needs a little bit of a nudge. And that's one of my favorite things about behavioral science, is it helps us design for the people we are, not the people that we think we are. So with that in mind, you all now have a intro to behavioral science and to what's called dual process theory. If you didn't know it before, congratulations. So what does that mean? So we applied this to energy adoption, to energy program adoption, and specifically electrification adoption. And we applied it across another theory, diffusion of innovation theory, Everett Rogers. Most people are familiar with this curve, this interpersonal model that was popularized by Malcolm Gladwell, and the tipping point that says that through groups, there are these different ways that innovation spreads, from the early innovators and early adopters into the late majority and laggers. And who you're addressing matters, because all of these groups respond differently. In addition, 2/3 of this book is devoted to another model, another process that is less discussed because Malcolm Gladwell didn't put it in a book, which is the intrapersonal model. And this is the innovation decision process. So as we move, and not everyone goes in exactly this order, sometimes we decide and then we learn about something because our partner just comes home with a thing or says, we're electrifying, and the decision's been made and now we learn. But we can look across these phases to get a sense of where the barriers are and where and how we can intervene in order to optimize, increase people's likelihoods to adopt any energy technology or participate in any energy program, but I'm focusing here on home electrification. So starting with knowledge, lack of knowledge is a huge barrier for across electrification technologies, including heat pump water heaters, HVAC, induction. There's a lack of knowledge as well as some misperceptions, right? Ranging from 20 to 80%. What can we do about that? So the most traditional way we do it is messaging campaigns, emails, bills, home energy reports. These are necessary and insufficient because not everyone, I'm going to blow your mind, reads the things that you send to them. I know. Get your tissues out. It's true. So we also need to make sure that we're bringing in trusted messengers, and going to who people listen to and going to where people talk. That's trusted messengers and community events. So finding ways to integrate. Who do people go to? When somebody's water heater breaks, who do they call? an energy provider or a plumber or a contractor, right? Like really making sure that we understand how the information ecosystem works, that we're educating these middle actors, trusted messengers, and also that we're able to go into places both in person, like workshops and town hall meetings, as well as online forums like Nextdoor that we're educating. The police departments in many cities started assigning community officers into their local Nextdoor groups to help be a resource to say, here, I'm here if you have a question. I think this is something we underutilized in the energy and climate space. Also, integrating information on new and changing rates into messaging can really help as people realize that there is a huge financial incentive to electrify, to get off grid, and that once they do that, they have control over when they're using electricity and can really get some deep savings that can help increase the value proposition of electrification. And then finally, don't miss opportunities to counter misinformation when you hear it. This is one of the reasons why it's good to be on Nextdoor, on Facebook, and local groups, because there is a lot of information going out about why things like heat pumps and induction are not a good idea. So make sure that you're not just pushing your own message in your own channels, but finding healthy, productive ways to counter misinformation as much as possible. Moving on to persuasion. These technologies need to be seen as providing a better value or service than what they're replacing, especially because quite often they do cost more. Maybe that will change, but it hasn't happened yet. So just this works as well as that is not enough. So we really need to, and again, be overcoming any concerns or misperceptions. There are concerns with electric heating about reliability, being single fuel, cold heat loss, and there is still this common perception that gas heats better. Gas is just what you use. And so we really need to be thinking clearly about what is the value proposition and why is this better. And then there are these misperceptions around poor performance of induction stoves, not as much talked about the dangers and the health impacts of gas-powered stoves and how safe. One of my favorite, might be able to find it if you look at Beck, Stacia and Reuven both talked about the Behavior Energy Climate Change Conference. We did a comedy competition of comedy videos, and one of my favorites was called Baby on the Stove. And it was about how, not that you should do this, don't try this at home, but induction is so safe you can put a baby on a stove right next to where you're cooking because the heat doesn't transfer. So really talking about those benefits is essential. As well as, and Reuven talked about this, integrating social norms. It is phenomenal how powerful of a motivator. This will not work on Spock. Spock would not care what his neighbors are doing. But these are kind of door hangers. This is a classic study that Jess Nolan ran. It was her master's thesis in 2008 that they asked people which of these messages would get you to use less energy in your home. And they were ranked in order. Number one, when you ask people, save money. 2, save the planet. 3, be a good citizen. And 4, your neighbors are doing it. Then they took these 4 messages, turned them into door hangers, and randomly assigned each home to get one of these 4 door hangers. Guess which one performed the best? You probably guessed it because I did a very good job of leading into this. It was your neighbors are doing better. This paper is called Social Normative Influence is Highly Underestimated. If you ask people what will work on them, they will answer as Spock. If you try things out, they will respond as Homer. So program and message to Homer. A couple other ways you can integrate social norms if you're not going to do a door hanger campaign. Home energy reports, by the way, the whole kind of O-Power and home energy report industry is based on this exact research. So in addition, peer influence campaigns, you can not just say, here's what your neighbors are doing, but actually get testimonials from neighbors, from community members. That increases the power of that. And then obviously social proof messaging, trusted statistics, ratings from peers, people like this, people agree, Yelp, right? Think about like Thumbtack, all these different places where we see social proof messaging driving adoption. Then moving into decision. Ooh, so when it comes especially to water heaters, home heating and cooling and water heating especially, the decision process largely relies on emergency replacement. Research suggests that somewhere between 70 and 90% of water heater replacements are emergency. And when something breaks, when you have no hot water and a stinky kid just got home from soccer practice, you are not thinking long term. You are thinking, how do I get this done cheap, fast, and good? And cheap, fast, good, if you've ever heard, pick two. Cheap, fast takes precedence, right? And we know that heat pumps are not always the cheap or the fast option. So really thinking through not just cost, but again, that trust and middle actors. Where are people going? Who are they going to? How do you grab people at this moment where they are most likely to be engaging from limbic? Right? Most likely to be engaging in Homer brain and not Spock brain. Because when you're planning a renovation of your home, you get very rational. You have spreadsheets. I have spreadsheets. But when something breaks, you don't. You just go, who can do it and how can it get done? So one thing that we like to talk about is leveraging moments that matter. So I'll talk about 3 key moments that matter, specific moments. When someone moves, huge. When something breaks, right? So who do people call? I'm going to harp on this one more time. Make sure you're working with your middle actors, right? Find out who they're going to call when this happens. So when they buy, it's a realtor, it's a GC. When something breaks, it's probably a plumber or a handyman. Make sure that you are integrated. Second, ongoing moments. This is where things like those home energy reports come in, annual bill inserts. Those do matter. Like I said, necessary and insufficient. And then the third, created moments. What if we got to encourage people when we're spring cleaning to do annual HVAC maintenance, right? Cleaning out your dusty filters and checking and making sure that you're optimizing for the life. That also would enable us to find end of life units that can be replaced so that we're not relying on emergency replacement. I think these created moments are huge opportunities that are being underutilized. Moving into implementation, getting people to want to do something gets you about 60% of the way there. Oof, right? So 40%. Electrification adoption lags willingness by about 40%. And if that sounds weird to you, think to yourself, is there anything you've meant to do this week that you haven't done? Wake up early, meditate, go for a run. I don't know, not eat the second donut, Homer, right? Like, no donut shame here. Donuts are great. But wanting to do something and doing it are not perfectly correlated. Intention is the leading predictor of implementation, but it doesn't get you there, right? So when we think about things like electrification, if we're not even doing it for our own bodies, we really need to help get people over the hump. So what that's called the intention to action gap. And we need to help people along the process. Some ways Reuven actually talked about a lot of these, but planning, commitment, implementation, planning, pledges, commitments, and going through your entire implementation process and removing friction. Make every step along the way as simple as possible. Anywhere you're asking for them to take a photo of something where a self-attestation would do, let them self-attest. Look at every single step in your process and think, how can I make this easier? Think Amazon one click, right? Like anything you can do. It's so easy for somebody to get stuck, put something down, or leave that tab open in their computer and forget to get back to it forever. Finally, confirmation. You're not done when they're done. Turn customers into champions. Issues often arise when people fail to learn how to effectively operate a new technology. So make sure that you're getting involved as soon as possible after something's installed, offering support, help, advice. If that can be done during install, great. Problems, word of mouth. People talk more when they're unhappy than when they're happy. So you want to keep people as far from being unhappy as possible. And then we want to support those that are happy. How do we do that? Start a conversation with them, highlight cool features, motivate referrals. Give them the 25 for you, 25 for them dollars, right? Or something, right? Encourage people to share with others. Make sure that you're showing them all the cool things they can do with this new product that they couldn't do before. Make sure that you're engaging in that conversation. And what if we could really get people to install? We should be throwing heat pump warming parties. I don't know if we're going to get that far, but find a way to help celebrate. Even instead of a thank you note, a congratulations note. You now own a heat pump. You're a part of the solution. Reinforce happiness, celebration, positivity, and then encourage them to share so that your customers become your best promoters. And then you get this cycle where you get back to these trusted messengers over here, peer influence. I talked about it a million times, right? Trusted messengers, peer influence campaigns. This starts here with every person that you make happy. So with that, I want to thank all our partners that funded this work. Calpine Peninsula, I should have changed that. That's now Westlight Energy as of like 2 weeks ago. Uplight for funding this work, the team who worked on it, you for joining this webinar, Stacia for inviting me to speak. And since Reuven mentioned Bear Hub, I did want to throw out a couple more things that we're working on together. I did this right before, so I don't have QR codes or links set up. But in addition to Bear Hub, we also do these monthly meetings in the behavior, energy, climate change community. So if you want to talk with nerds like us, every month, every other, we do a webinar, then we do a journal club, and we do a lean coffee. And this month, we're doing a journal club and we're talking about a really interesting journal article. It's super fun. It's not a speaker like this. You get in a room and then we divide you into breakout rooms so you can just talk with people about interesting ideas. Highly, highly encourage you. Go to becconference.com. I wasn't able to put a QR code in. But with that, I will shut up.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was great. I'm going to bring up the slide deck on my end, so give me 1 second. Okay, this brings us now to our Q&A time, and I wanted to encourage everyone to add any Q&A or any questions you have to the chat box in the bottom of your screen. And apologies, my camera just zoomed in very, very much. Let me fix that. Okay. My camera just is doing funky things today. So yes, please put any questions you have for Beth or Reuven into that Q&A box. Now, to get us started, I wanted to ask a question and provide a bit of context for Washington State. So I live in Washington right now, and here in Washington, residential and commercial buildings account for about 26% of Washington state emissions. And to meet our greenhouse gas emission targets by 2015, the building sector must dramatically scale up efforts to achieve equitable clean buildings by 2030. And we know that the technological solutions to decrease emissions in buildings exist. But as we just talked about today, their adoption in residential and commercial spaces depends on behavioral and social drivers. So Beth and Reuven, I'm interested in your thoughts about what are some of the most important research questions we should be asking and answering to help scale up these efforts.
I can start. So you will not be shocked to know that one of them is middle actors and contractors. There's a lot of really good research going on there. Not enough. We're still really studying. I think anything that studies where and how people are actually getting information. We do a lot of research on how, again, how to send better emails. And we know that emails don't influence behavior as much as community groups do. So I've been doing some work recently, which I think is really interesting on religious congregations with a project called Creation Justice Ministries. I think there's a lot of promise. We think that these are groups that highly correlate with political conservative, with less environmental, but this idea of creation justice is a deeply embedded religious value. So I think like finding groups that can align that we don't think about. And then the absolute number one is mid contractors, GCs, plumbers, realtors, anyone who's working in the in that space. I just bought a house and I'm having a really hard time getting someone to install a heat pump. Like they fight me on it. It's crazy. I'm in California. And then I'll say one other, which I've just started doing. We just got a grant from the California Energy Commission, and I think Washington is similar to parts of California on rural customers. So much of our research has been done in urban and suburban areas and rural customers, especially when we're looking at decommissioning end of line gas lines. Those end of line, if you keep 50 end of line customers, you're keeping several 100-mile gas line running. So we're just starting to study that. I would love to see more of that. I want to see more people that I can talk to about that at conferences.
Yeah, this is a great question. Beth, I agree with you with these middle actors. We are actually writing up a report right now on a survey we conducted on HVAC installers and salespeople and why they do or do not install more efficient HVAC, do other efficiency behaviors while they're there. So I think that is an important part of the puzzle. But I usually step back even one step earlier when I start working on a project like this and ask, what is the target behavior and the target audience? And in your question, you've identified both residential and commercial buildings, and I think that those are a little bit different. And so for example, so like, are you more interested in one or the other, for example? Then what is the actual action you're talking about? Is it upgrading your HVAC? Is it installing attic insulation? Are we talking about low income customers? Are we talking about, so, all of it, like the equation changes for each of these characters. And I think it's important to first think deeply about first of all, who's most likely to change? Second of all, what's the most impactful behavior you can change? And so you find a sweet spot of like feasibility and impact, and that's how you decide what to target. Once you've done that, then you can ask all these questions, do segmentation studies, do focus groups, do surveys, and find out like what's preventing people from doing the action. And when they do it, what motivated them to do it? Then you can start I think uh, not to tout our field too much, but I think behavioral scientists after that can like come in with ideas that conform to or like build on what you find in your research. If you find that there's these specific barriers, then maybe these specific solutions would be best. And they're not always increased incentives or rebates. I mean, that's important. But sometimes it's also just get more information to people, or sometimes it's also uh, show that other people are doing it. Everybody thinks that nobody's doing it, but everybody actually is. So, there's different things you can do, and depending on the situation, and always test it in the field, because another thing behavioral scientists bring to the table is an understanding of testing and how something that worked in one place may not necessarily give you the results in another place, and you need to effectively evaluate everything. Sorry, long answer to a short question, medium question, but
No,
I
that's
can
great.
talk a
Yeah,
lot.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And as both Beth and Reuven, you've been answering my question, we've had quite a few questions come into the Q&A. So I will switch over now and do some audience questions. The first one we received from Kim, and they asked that a practical challenge that we see is that customers who switch from natural gas to a heat pump or heat pump water heater may experience higher monthly bills due to the difference between the rates of electric and gas. Has this trade-off shown up in any of your research? And if so, what insights have you found regarding customer acceptance and satisfaction of electrification measures when monthly costs increase? So I don't know who would like to
Yeah,
take.
it's a tough one. I hate to be that guy that says read my research, but we wrote a paper on this a couple of years ago. So electricity rates that help encourage heat pump adoption, and I want to say that I don't think so. I do think that climate change is very important, and I think electrification is very important, but I don't want to encourage somebody to raise their bills dramatically. And therefore, I and ACEEE are of the opinion that it might not be for everybody right now. What we need is a solution that makes it affordable for everybody. But if you're like a low income customer and you're struggling to get by, and now your energy bills are going to go up because you've electrified, I'm not in favor of that. I think that there are things that need to come in tandem with the electrification, which is, energy efficiency and preferable rates. Um, those two things will make it possible for more people to electrify. And so I don't know like, I think the attendee's question is, what do you do when electricity rates are gonna go up as a matter of electrification? How do you convince them to do it anyway? And I would say I probably wouldn't convince them to do it anyway until I can make the math work. That said, I don't want to close the door. If somebody really feels passionate about it and is well aware that their rates will go up and they want to do something, you listen and you install anyway. And I think that the issue is that in many places, rates will go down or stay the same, and the contractors just aren't aware of that, or they're opposed for some reason with experience or whatever it is. They don't recommend these upgrades anyway. And so I think that when there's a misperception, you got an issue, and then you can actually address that misperception. When there's actual changes in energy bills, yeah, I think you need to think carefully about who you're encouraging to adopt.
I'll just want a couple quick things. Agree with everything. Yeah, I think I'm in California. Our electricity is expensive, so we deal with this a lot. That's one of the reasons. One of my recommendations is like look at promoting rates. So you're higher, but you have a little more control, right? Because so helping customers find out, can you load shift to save? If so, a heat pump might make sense for you. If you can't, then it might not right now. I do think that we do all of us, our entire field, a disservice when we try and hide the fact that rates could go up, right? And then we start losing trust. So I think saying, hey, this is for some customers. What it gives you is more options and opportunity because we have time of use rates. Take this quiz, do fill in the blank to see if it works for you. So I think marrying rate education with electrification in places where electricity is more expensive than gas is essential. And to Reuven's point, just to reemphasize, to name that so that we're not, cutting off our nose to spite our face. We're not making people feel like we're out of touch and just not aware of the actual affordability crisis that's going on right now across the world.
Great. Thank you both for answering that question. We have another question from Martin about policymakers with respect to motivation messages. So how are motivation messages different when influencing policymakers? And I think maybe as compared to residential customers, for example.
Yeah, they're super different, right? The incentive's different. The incentive for a policymaker is often intrinsically doing right by their voters and extrinsically getting reelected. So you tie into those motivations. And so that's, I think, where having really strong research, what Reuven was talking about, this idea that support for climate change is under reported. And so there's this silent majority. So policymakers need to know how many of their voters actually support and would support them, because there is a common misperception that people will only vote with their pocketbooks and don't support anything, that's climate related. And if framed correctly, that's not necessarily the case. So I would say that's one key thing. And policymakers, because they have staff, can take, I would say, a much higher information content than your average consumer. I would say when it comes to how much data to give, always push a simple message and have the clunky, the jargon available like a second click or a second meeting. But simplest for residential, more complex for commercial. The larger the commercial, the more wonky you can get. And then policymakers are like mid to large commercial. You can get wonky because they have someone on their staff that'll read it, especially if you're looking at like the federal or state level. When you're in super local, they might not have as big of staffs, but you can get a little more nitty gritty and really focus on how it would affect their voters and their reelection bid.
So it's actually like a very difficult question, because I'm physically located here in DC, and all around me is people who their entire careers is just influencing policymakers. So like I can't give you in 1 minute the way that to influence policymakers. What I will say is, um, first, there is one similarity in when you would discuss with a homeowner and a policymaker, and that is you don't talk about what you care about, you talk about what they care about. And so in many cases, I don't even mention climate change. I talk about affordability, or I talk about health, or there's many reasons to do any given action. And so talk about what the other person cares about. And that goes for anybody, policymaker or otherwise. The other thing to note is just, and this is just a little piece of like convincing policymakers, a little tidbit. It's like there's no job like policymaker. Is it a politician? Is it a regulator? Is it the person that runs the program at the utility? Is it the city official? Like there's so many different actors involved here, and they require different kind of information. They have different motivations. And so depending on who it is and what the issue is and where they are, you'd have to work with them in different ways. And just like all people, working directly, personally, listening first, these are all critical issue strategies.
Right. So we have about 5 minutes left of this webinar, and we have 3 more questions from the audience. I'm going to combine 2 that are related from Rajiv and Monica. So it's about information, disinformation, as well as programs and utilities doing a good job or doing well. So information can be overwhelming in this day and age. What levers of change have you found to be pivotal to deter disinformation or misdirection attempts with respect to technology adoption and messaging? And then as follow-up to that, have you seen any programs or utilities that are doing a particularly good job of implementing practices? So it could be around information and or anything else we talked about today as well.
Okay, Beth, you've jumped in first in all of these, so I mean, I can do my best. There's a lot of questions there. I think in terms of countering misinformation, the first thing to do is learn the actual in what people actually believe. And so to do that, you usually have to you have to gather information from a number of sources because you often will not get that directly by asking or even by talking with one informed expert. Once you have that information, I think it's important to learn where people get their information from. Uh, if, for example, you're looking at a social network, there's usually some people that are more influential that are looked to for information more frequently than others. If you can recruit that person or organization or community group to help you, that would be a great way to get misinformation dealt with. I think the key thing here is to make sure the message. So, for any given message, the things that make it more persuasive are the source, the message itself, and the audience, and they interact with each other. So in terms of the source, they have to be like a very credible and trustworthy source. It helps if they're attractive, not necessarily physically, but like likable. And then the message, it has to resonate with the person as well. So I would just focus on the source here and just say it needs to come from a trusted messenger, one that's credible. And to the degree that you can get that, you'll be more likely to change misinformation. But just like everything, don't expect 100% of the people to change. We work around the margins. I think behavioral science is not the only solution. It's a piece of the puzzle, and we capture part of we help part way, but we can't do everything 100%.
Yeah, I would say just a couple. I mean, we want to counter misinformation. I would not necessarily try going after the people who are putting it out. I got really interested in climate deniers when I started grad school. I took a class on social movements with these 2 famous social movement theorists, both named David. And I went into David Meyer's office hours and I was like, I'm really interested in climate denial. I think there's a big problem. And he kind of said, yeah, probably. And he said, it's not clear if Martin Luther King ever spoke at a KKK rally. Which I think is really interesting, right? Like, so we don't, so grow the base. And focus on countering misinformation in the venues where it's going to be most receptive rather than the venues where it's going to be most not receptive. And again, I'm going to go back to my obsession with middle actors and with the people who are, as Reuven said, the most trusted and the people who are most likely to influence. So like I would really get surgical in your attempts to deter disinformation or counter misinformation. You might not be able to deter it because it's out there. I know, Stacia, I answered one question in writing, but I wanted to say somebody asked if there are other studies about before and after choices of different interventions. And I put the link to that person. But our Journal Club article this month, I'm not gonna lie, I do run Journal Club, is on that. It's literally called Addressing Climate Change with Behavioral Science, a global intervention of 63 countries. So check out that link. You don't even have to come to Journal Club. Just check the link to the article to that person that Vienna that asked about that. I wanted to throw that last one in there.
Great. Thank you for doing that, Beth. All right, we're right at time. So thank you, Beth and Reuven, so much for joining today. It has been a pleasure, and I'm so glad you could join us. We're going to share out the recording and the slides by the end of next week. Sign up for our next webinar if you're interested, as well as our mailing list for CTI, so you can stay in the know about future forums. And with that, thank you so very much, everyone, and have a fantastic rest of your Tuesday. Bye.
Thanks, Stacia.